Alrighty, friends. We are trying something totally new this evening. And if you are just joining us for the first time, I'm really stoked that you guys are here. And I apologize that you're not able to see my face, but hopefully you can hear my voice. So, what would be so helpful would be just giving me a thumbs up or a hello in the comments. So I know that you guys can hear me, and I'm just readjusting the screen a little bit. We had so many wonderful pictures this evening that I wanted to share with you guys that I felt it was a disservice to not share them with you through this PowerPoint and this presentation. So go ahead and if you could, like I said, comment down in the comment section just to say hello so I know that you guys are able to hear me and that you're able to see my screen okay. And with that, I'll go ahead and get started. If you're not familiar with the San Dieguito River Valley Conservancy or who we are or what we do, I will go ahead and introduce myself and the Conservancy. Thank you, Len and Cassidy. Welcome. It's so good to see you guys. I say that in quotation marks. Glad that you guys are able to join and this is working out. So going back to a little bit of the San Dieguito River Valley Conservancy and who we are a 501c3 nonprofit. We are an environmental organization that focuses on the San Dieguito Watershed. And our main mission is to preserve, protect, and share both natural and cultural resources. So what that means, natural resources, we have these beautiful lands and waterways and habitats that we love to preserve for now and obviously for future generations. And there are also amazing cultural resources within our watershed that deserve equal protection with indigenous communities and also different settlers in our region. Hey, Bill, good to see you. Andrea, Marie, thank you for coming on today. I'm a little nervous, Bill. I feel like you might have way more knowledge on some of the things I might talk about tonight as far as water goes, but I am so excited. I'm not sure if you guys had the opportunity to check out some of those images that we shared on our Facebook page previously, but they just blew my mind on the history of water within our region. So to get back a little bit on track, that's what the San Dieguito River Valley Conservancy is, preserving and protecting and sharing what we have within our watershed. And if you have never joined a live before and have never seen my face, this is me. I have one professional and then one field photo. Bill, I think you're actually in the background of one of those photos. So I am the education manager for the Conservancy. So I go out and I do outreach and public programs. And then we also do K through 12 programs. So really fun. I just wanted you guys, if you've never met me before or seen me on live before, just to be able to, see my face in a different way. So tonight we're going to be discussing watersheds. Last week, if you weren't able to join us, we talked about birds within the region and within our watershed and their importance. And one thing that really came to mind when I was thinking about doing this next series was, what is a watershed? We mention it all the time, like San Dieguito Watershed, over and over and over again. And I have to remember that not everyone is familiar with the term watersheds. So really simply put, watersheds are a region of land that is influenced by the topography of mountains and acts as a natural drainage system. And no matter where you are in the world, you live in a watershed. And I don't know if you guys can see my mouse. I believe you can. But we have our headwaters up at the start, up in the mountains that go into rivers, valleys, and streams. And then you have a drainage point. Sometimes, if you're in the middle of the United States or a continent, that's just going to drain out to a lake. But eventually, the water within watersheds within our region will drain into the ocean. So this is a good image. I hope that would be very useful for friends that might not be familiar with what watersheds are. So we have our Precipitation, so like rain or snowpack, and in our watershed, that's Julian area and even Ramona. So within the high mountains of our watershed, that's where our headwaters start through a natural spring called Ironside Springs. But you also have these smaller creeks and waterways that are called tributaries. So you'll have that rain hitting the sides of the mountain. You have this watershed divide on these outer borders that are influenced by, again, the heights of these mountains. And then eventually it's going to drain all the way to that drainage point, which for us, again, is the ocean. Our watershed starts, we'll go ahead and go here. Our watershed starts, this is big red arrow, starts up in the Julian area and then extends all the way down through Del Mar. So a question that I wanted to ask you guys is, do you know what watershed you live in? I'm really curious. Go ahead and comment if you feel comfortable. What watershed do you live in? This one listed as the Carlsbad watershed is also known as the Escondido Creek watershed. I live literally just on the border of the San Dieguito watershed and the Escondido Creek watershed. It's really, really a treat to be able to have such wonderful partners. We are partners with a lot of other organizations that are watershed focused. And so yeah, if you feel comfortable, go ahead, comment below what watershed do you live in. And if you're unaware of what watershed you live in, I would encourage you to get to know the region that you live in and the wonderful resources that are around you. So with that being said, we have our watershed, which is the San Dieguito watershed that we protect. This is a close-up map of what it looks like. We have, again, up in this Julian area, part of the Vulcan mountain range. That's where that spring is. And it extends all the way down through Santa Isabel, Ramona, Escondido, Rancho Santa Fe, and then into Del Mar. And that's awesome. Thank you guys for sharing what watersheds that you guys live in. So like I was saying, it starts up in that Julian area and then goes all the way down into Del Mar. And if you're unaware, there's a great amount of variability within habitats and land formations throughout our watershed that change so greatly. And Robert, I really like what you wrote in your comment, that you live within Penasquitos watershed, but your water supply comes from San Dieguito. And excuse me, I think that is a really wonderful point, that in San Diego, not many people are aware of where their water is coming from or what percentage of water is coming from Colorado, the Colorado River, or if it's domestic water. So that's a really good point. Thank you for sharing, Robert. So I have another quick question for you guys. How many miles do you think the San Dieguito River is? So remember, our watershed region starts up in the Julian area and then extends all the way down into Del Mar. So I'm super curious. How long do you think our river is in miles? I love asking this question to our kiddos because I get so many variability in their answers, like 1,000 miles or like 1 mile, and it's so fun. So I'm super curious. How many miles do you think our river is? And while you guys are hopefully guessing some answers, Bill, good guess, 60 miles. I'm going to show a recreation of the western part of our watershed. And so long ago, Bill, this is cheating a little bit. Yeah, so our river is about 60 miles long. Good guesses, guys. And like I was mentioning before, there's a great amount of variability within those habitats, the animals you'll find, the plants that you'll see, and even down to the geology. So it's really impressive. So going back to the image, and I know it's not perfect, but the image that's in the center of the screen, this is the western end of our watershed. And this is what we can expect our watershed to have looked like many years ago. So there was much more of an equal flow of water. And this is what our valley looks like today. So our valley, again, this is the western end. This isn't, the entire encompassing watershed. But you can see that the river obviously is much thinner now, and there's a concentration of water at this point, and there's a lot more developments. And one thing that I also wanted to mention are some of these significant developments that we're going to get into. And this kind of gets into the history of the watershed. And if you guys have questions while I'm talking, I'm going to be trying to insert some questions as we go along. But please pop your questions or your observations down in the comment section. I love everything that you guys are sharing right now. This is so much fun to look through. So as I was saying, there's been a lot of development within our watershed. And it would be a disservice not to properly mention and highlight the indigenous communities within our watershed and within San Diego that were forcibly moved onto their reservations, unfortunately, during the settlement of Spanish and Western settlers and European settlers. With that being said, in the late 1800s and into the early 1900s, there was a really, really big boom in agriculture in our watershed. And this was centered around the San Pasqual Valley. If you're unsure of where that area is, just think of the safari park. I think most people know where the safari park is, and that's the San Pasqual Valley. Now it's an agricultural preserve, and that agricultural preserve is organic, so there's much less pollutants that are going into our waterways at that point specifically. The other point of development that I wanted to highlight, and these are more so in relation to our water flow and also the different pollutants that are in our watershed, is in 1918, Lake Hodges was built. And we have some really, really fantastic pictures coming up about Lake Hodges. That was in 1918 that was finished. So we obviously just a couple of years ago celebrated the 100-year anniversary of this dam, which is just crazy to think about. And then and Lake Hodges is in the Escondido area off of Del Dios Highway. And then in 1927, Lake Sutherland Dam was started to be built. And there were some funding issues and change of ownership issues, and wasn't completed actually until the mid-1900s. And Lake Sutherland is in the Ramona area. And let me know, have you guys heard of Lake Sutherland before? I'm always so curious because most of the people that I know that aren't familiar with watersheds, they definitely know of Lake Hodges because that's a really popular hiking and mountain biking spot within our watershed. So let me know if you've ever heard of Lake Sutherland before. And that's going to be this picture on the bottom left. And the picture on the bottom right, I'm sure you guys are familiar with, that's the Del Mar Fairgrounds. The Del Mar Fairgrounds was built in 1937. Yes, Len, we have been to Lake Sutherland before. And Monica, yes, so I agree. A lot of people, or a decent amount of people, have heard of Lake Sutherland, but it's not as easily accessible. But it's really nice when it's open. Bill, I love that tidbit that the dam has only flown twice since it was built. That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. So back to the Del Mar Fairgrounds, that was built in the 1930s, and that was built on top of parts of the San Dieguito Lagoon. And if you're unfamiliar with the rarity of lagoon habitats in California, it's estimated, I want to say, in between 3 to 5% of California's lagoons are remaining. So it's really, really important. And we're so thankful for our partners and our funders that have allowed us to do such great restoration work in our lagoon so we can preserve this gem of a habitat. So Lake Sutherland, going back to that, this is what Lake Sutherland looks like. It's much smaller than Lake Hodges, but I wanted to show you guys just some pictures of that infrastructure and how it's set up. And we, I think either a year or two ago, used to do these things called hidden hikes, where if you become a member of the San Dieguito River Valley Conservancy, we can go on certain hikes that are special for members only, and sometimes you can see wild horses going through this area. It's really fantastic. So Lake Sutherland, again, is up in the eastern part of our watershed up in the Ramona area. And this picture absolutely took my breath away. This is moving down towards Lake Hodges. So I want to say thank you to UC San Diego, their Scripps Institute of Oceanography specifically. They have a wonderful collection of photos alongside the Library of Congress photos. I have a mixture of both of them. I'd encourage you guys to go and look at them because I was spending way too much on this, way too much time looking at these photos. But the one that's in the center of your screen right now is an old image from the early 1900s of the San Dieguito River where they were going to develop and eventually developed the Lake Hodges Dam. And it's a little emotional for me, and I'm really curious what your feelings are seeing the San Dieguito River free flowing in that way. I'm really curious how that image makes you feel and whether or not it's an emotional attachment to the San Dieguito River, but an overall before dams were built within San Diego. It's really interesting to be able to see a glimpse really into the past of what our watershed once looked like when it was free flowing. So that was an early image before development. And this is really, really interesting. All of this is interesting to me. This is something I say at everything. But there was a family that greatly inhabited, a European family that was really focused around the Lake Hodges or eventual Lake Hodges area called the Carroll family. And initially, when the developers were coming to develop the dam, they were going to call it the Carroll Reservoir. So it's really, really interesting. You can see right here on the map in the middle, it says Carroll Reservoir and the Carroll Canal. And we'll get into the canal and the flumes in a little bit, and by no means am I an expert. Len, if you're still watching, you might have a lot more information on how that works than I do. But it's really cool that we can see that they had these rivers listed, and Escondido, our sister watershed north of us, listed as well. So this Carroll family, they eventually sold off most of their parcels that they owned, or a little bit differently is the remaining parcels that the family did own was eventually flooded out by the dam filling up. So that was really, really interesting. But let me know if you guys have ever heard of that before, that it was once Lake Hodges, our reservoir, was once going to be called the Carroll Reservoir. So this is the beginning phase of the Lake Hodges Dam. I'm not going to spend too much on these individual images because we don't have too much time left, but maybe you can watch this back and pause and look at them a little bit more deeply. But you can see the beginning in kind of like the middle lower half of the photo, the beginning phase of the Lake Hodges Dam. And again, it's really interesting to see what our valley looked like before. And it's so different to how it is today. And I guess I should mention some of the reasons why the Lake Hodges Dam was built alongside of Lake Sutherland was due to agriculture. And that was a really, really big influencer, was agriculture. And then also just for a stable water source. We live in a Mediterranean type climate here in San Diego, and we don't get enough rainfall to be able to support usually the population growth that we have today. Andrea, I really like that point. There is a Carroll Lane in Escondido. I wonder if that's related. So anyway, these dams were built, these reservoirs were built to have a stable water source, and specifically Lake Hodges, this water source was going to be shipped out through Rancho Santa Fe, Del Mar, and Solana Beach, which were growing communities. So this is kind of like the bedrock bottom source of where the Lake Hodges Dam was built. They had some flooding hiccups along the way, which I think is really interesting. We're actually doing a lesson with some of the students that I work with at a school, high school students, and there's that balance between controlling nature and living with nature. And the dam hasn't overflown a ton of times since it's been built, but definitely through the building process and others, it has seen some flooding issues. So this is another example of that. There was that flooding issue. You can see that gentleman in the upper left corner of this image. And this one is a back image of the dam. So like if you were in the water now, and you can barely see, but in the bottom left of the image is where that water is starting to fill up. So again, super crazy that you can see, this structure barren and have no water, all that weight and pressure behind it. And if you've never seen the Lake Hodges Dam up close before, you can see it when you're driving on Del Dios Highway, and there's actually a little turnout staging area that you can pull into. I'm not sure if it's open though right now, but I would recommend you guys going to look at it. It's crazy. And these are the main developers. Colonel Fletcher in that time, he is the very, very tall man on the far right. He was a big developer in that time. And then Mr. Hodges over here, that's who the dam is named after, not the Carroll family. They switched it to the Hodges. And this is a picture of the dam slowly starting to fill up. And this is an image of it going over the spillway. So everyone just kind of gazing at it as it spills over the spillway. And I think this is a really interesting old-timey photo of these men out on the water, the new lake that they created. And so this is Lake Hodges. What they ended up developing and building into that system were those flumes. And flumes follow the natural contours of the land. And if you're driving along Del Dios Highway, I have heard people mention, like, was there a train that went along here? Like, these look like train tracks. So that's what these look like. And those are remnants of the old flumes that would transport water from the dam down to the coastal locations. So again, flumes follow that natural contour of the land, and that gravitational pull ends up moving that water from Escondido all the way downwards. All right. And this is a really, really interesting image. I'm curious to see if you guys recognize this. If you do recognize this image, please comment down below. This image is from the 1920s in Del Mar. Del Mar had a pier. I had no idea Del Mar had a pier. But the pier, this is an image from the 20s, but it was taken down in the late 1950s because it kept getting bashed by the waves. And it was too expensive to maintain, so the city took it down. So let me know if you knew that there was a Del Mar pier before. And it's really fun to look at the time period clothing that they were wearing as well. And this image now in the center, I wanted to highlight really quickly, is there was also an airport in Del Mar. Let me know if you knew there was an airport in Del Mar. And the reason I'm talking about all of this development and building is to really talk about how water has changed within our watershed and our landscape due to natural occurrences, but also human occurrences and building. So this airport was used as a hangar during the World Wars, and also as a tourist spot. So people, well, not tourist spot, but for people to be able to fly into the region, into the area. If you look, it's a little fuzzy towards the back. It says, "Welcome to Del Mar." So again, this area, I'll scroll back up. This airport was eventually removed, thankfully. And unfortunately, though, there was a lot of that asphalt left over in the water. And during the San Dieguito Lagoon restoration project, which cost millions and millions of dollars, they, during that process, removed a lot of that asphalt because the toxins were leaching into the water and essentially poisoning the lagoon. Oh, good. I'm so glad that you guys are finding this interesting. And as far as, oh, I forgot to mention this. I'm going to scroll back up. Sorry if that scrolling makes you guys nauseous. But also within the Del Mar region, the lagoon was also used as a farming area for things like lima beans and red beets. And then they were transported up the train up into the Santa area north of our region. Marie, that's a really good question. Where was the airport located? They actually decommissioned the airport because they built I-5. So if you are familiar, the airport actually is right by Old Grand Avenue Bridge. And if you're unfamiliar with that area, maybe you might be familiar with Viewpoint Brewing. Also, shout out to Viewpoint Brewing. They're a wonderful partner, but it's just a little bit east, like a couple hundred feet east of them. You can see remnants of, the layout of that airport. So super crazy. And Len, take a train, take a plane, yes, to Del Mar. I love that. That's awesome. I love that little tidbit. And this is an image in the center of the screen of Solana Beach in the 1920s, I believe. So this image I thought was really, really interesting, just for context of how much our watershed specifically have changed. This is a picture of Lake Hodges, the dam that I took just a few weeks ago. That's what it looks like now. And what I wanted to also mention, because I know we're just about out of time, but what I wanted to mention was in the event of all this development, there was a lot of change in plant habitat and also the animals that lived within that region or that wildlife that depended on that water source. It greatly changed. But a positive that came out of this that we talked about in the bird chat that we had last week was that this has become a designated, globally important bird area, Lake Hodges. So something really positive came out of that. And I did not take this image, but this is an image of what Del Mar looks like today. You can see the bluffs. If you've ever been to Dog Beach, let me know in the comments if you've been to Dog Beach. This is our Dog Beach right here. And the Del Mar Fairgrounds, and then our inlet, and then our lagoon as well. So we have the Coast 101 here. We have the train tracks, and then back all the way there is the 5. So I'm going to end with, I unfortunately don't have too much time to go over the exact pollutants per region of our watershed that's affecting it, but the main thing that's affecting our watershed is going to be this urban runoff, agricultural runoff, and then also domestic animals. So what you're seeing a lot of, people having these different fertilizers in their yards and their grasses that eventually get washed out either by sprinklers or by rain that will drain into our central river, and then those pollutants will compound over time and become more and more and more concentrated. And I did want to mention that the San Dieguito Watershed has a great amount of undeveloped or designated open space, which is really, really great that we can maintain a lot more of that connectivity than other watersheds within San Diego. So we have to scroll past these. These are specific pollutants for the different regions within our watershed. But I will end with these coastal pollutants definitely have a disproportionate share of that burden when compared to other parts of the watershed upstream. So these different pollutants will affect water quality, obviously, but that will affect the different wildlife, whether that's aquatic or terrestrial, the different plants that are there, and then also the oxygen levels, and just a whole mess of things. So something that has to be done fairly regularly at our coastal regions is because of the 101 and the train tracks. And the 5, we have to do something called dredging. And so you have to remove all of that excess sediment out of the way so the tidal flow can continue. And if that doesn't happen, the lagoon becomes very, very sick. And we already talked about how we have very, very few remaining lagoons left within California. So that was a really long, big history lesson, but just a quick recap, because I know we're out of time, is there are 11 watersheds within the county, and our river is 55, 60 miles long, and there's a great amount of diversity that you're seeing within our watershed, from the different plants, the animals, and the geology. And the way that our water system has changed over time has really influenced human innovation, population growth, and has had both positive and negative effects on the environment. So to end with this, I'm going to hop off in a second, but I really, really appreciate you guys joining. Please let me know if you enjoyed seeing these images. I think for the remaining 2 lessons, the next 2 weeks, I'm going to return back to the, looking at my face sort of a live, but I hope you enjoyed this. I thought there were just too many awesome images to pass up, and I didn't want to share it just off my iPad and bring it up to the camera. So I hope you guys sincerely enjoyed this. I appreciate you joining us. And again, if you're not familiar with the Conservancy or who I am, my contact information is in the bottom right. And I'll also put it in the comment after I hop off this live. And we have 2 remaining Facebook live chats. Next week is going to be talking about native plant communities. And then to end off our series, we're going to talk about a beginner's guide to hiking. I'm really excited to get more people out on trail when it's safe and how to do that safely. So I'm really excited, and I appreciate all the engagement. I love seeing you guys in the comments. It really helps connect that community. So with that, I am going to sign off. Again, my name is Ana Lutz-Johnson, and I am the Education Manager for the San Dieguito River Valley Conservancy. It was so great to, in air quotes, see you tonight, and I will see you next week. Have a good night, everyone.